Hello again, Struck Co-op. Diablo Force Open Beta tests are almost here, and I've been making and I'll keep making a bit more pre-launch theory-crafted semi-builds that should be good for fresh into endgame characters when the game launches. I plan to evolve those into full builds when the game is finally released and keep them updated when there's rebalance updates. Currently, I'm missing a lot of information such as maximum sockets per item slot, the different types of sockets. I'm missing information about sacred gear. I'm missing information about paragons and many, many more things. So that's what I mean by evolution, adding that as well as adding rows, suggested rows on each piece of equipment, on each slot when I know those. So this is one such build for the Sorcerer Class called Iceplosion, and as the name suggests, it's about explosions from ice, and I'm building around something called Shatter, which is kind of like a capstone final massive skill. Passive. The beta test will only let us reach level 25 and only let us play in the first act / zone fracture peaks. So that's why I'm saying that those builds would be more useful for people who are playing the actual game after launch, and ideally around level 50 plus 60 plus with some renown points gained to jumpstart your end game journey, post story grind. But you can still use them in a certain to a certain degree. You can use them to help you in the beta, to give you some ideas of which skills go well together. But again, you can't use the full setup in the beta with only 25 levels. But you can still at least get an ultimate. Now, I've also made spreadsheets, 2 of them. So there's one spreadsheet for those builds. All of my builds are there. There's links in the description to that one. And then I've made another one that is kind of like a skill tree calculator, build calculator, a mini version of it that has all the skills and passives for each class. And the one that has the builds, I've only shortlisted things that I think are worth considering to expand if you get more than 6345 skill points, as people got from the closed beta. If we get like 70 or more skill points, I've included things you could consider leveling up, or you could just consider taking points from one thing you may not like in putting it into another. So I've shortlisted the active skills I like using and passives that I think go well with them. So I hope you enjoyed this setup. Buckle up and let's go. I like starting those videos by talking about the specialization to avoid confusion. Last time I made a code build on the sorcerer, someone asked me, "Isn't it better to use Shatter?" Yes, it might have been better to use Shatter on that other setup, which was the snowballer. But my idea when making the snowballer was I wanted to build around Icefall. I started with Icefall, and this time I'm starting with Shatter. So this time I'm okay. Let's try a new skills that I think fit well with Shatter. And Shatter after freeze expires. Keep in mind keyword here expires. So you want freeze to expire. You don't want to prolong it. Enemies explode for 25% of the damage you deal to them while you dealt to them while frozen. I mean, if it's longer, there will be more damage they deal when they explode. So you have to think. Do you want to make them stay frozen for longer so you can do more damage with the risk of them dying? Because it doesn't say anything about them dealing that shatter damage if they die while they're still frozen. If I was a developer, I actually would have done it that way. Maybe it would have seemed too overpowered, but I would have made it so that they shatter upon death for all the damage dealt to them up until that point while they've been shattered. Otherwise, it's not that great, but still, 25% of the damage you deal as an explosion, which should be AoE, because yeah, that makes sense. If it's not AoE, it's gonna be underwhelming. Now that we've got this out of the way, let's talk about the ultimate I picked, Deep Freeze. Encase yourself in ice, becoming immune for 4 seconds, continually chilling enemies for 20 seconds. When Deep Freeze ends, frozen enemies shatter, another explosion. Casting Deep Freeze again ends the effect early. Chilling builds up to a freeze, so chill enemies X amount of times and then eventually it becomes a freeze, which is actually Several years ago, couple years ago maybe, when I was talking about what I think would be better for Torchlight 3, I was mentioning the best way to handle chill is, and frozen is that way. Chill enemies, and then eventually build up to a freeze. I'm very happy to see that Diablo is taking this approach to chill and freeze, as I had an idea in my head several years ago as the best way to handle them. Now, rather than just a slow. Gain X% of your life as a barrier for 6 seconds each time for each enemy shattered by deep freeze. So you'll be shattering a lot with this one, as you can see, and you're getting a barrier. When deep freeze ends, your active cooldowns are reduced by 50%, mind you. Well, not the ultimate one, but the other ones. Frostbite. You deal multiplicative more damage to frozen or vulnerable enemies, and multiplicative more damage to enemies who are frozen and vulnerable. Now, even more increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and frost skills deal multiplicative increased damage to elites, not bosses, just elites. Then, as a lucky hit chance, frost skills have up to 3% chance to instantly freeze. No need to say why I've maxed those ones, they're extremely strong passives. Ice Veil, 1 point here to unlock Hoarfrost. Your barriers have 5% increased duration. Barriers absorb damage from all sources up to a specific amount. You deal more damage to enemies that the more chilled they are, up to 6% multiplicative while they're frozen. So definitely nice, because we want to do as much damage to frozen enemies, so that Shatter can benefit from it. So massive synergy between this and this. No reason to take this one if this exists with that build. Summon a Frigid Blizzard that deals damage and continually chills enemies for 18% over 5 seconds. Blizzard duration is increased by 2 seconds, even better. And now there's multiple choices. I decided to take this one. This one would let you spam a little bit more, but this one, every second an enemy is in Blizzard, they take 2.5% multiplicative increased damage from you up to 20%, which is lovely. So yeah, I think if you have this and this, you would be able to get the 20% within those 7 seconds, hopefully. Now, Ice Blades. Interesting skill. Very interesting skill. I was thinking whether I should take Ice Blades or whether I should go for something else. But I mean, there isn't much to choose here under Conjuration. It's Hydra, Lightning Spear, Ice Blades. There's an option to just not put points into it, and then I decided to not put points into Ice Blades and take Teleport. I'll talk about Ice Armor, Frost Nova, Teleport in a moment. So alternatively, you could take Ice Blades by removing the points from Teleport or from Frost Nova. But I decided not to take it, but I left it there as an option. Now, you gain damage reduction against elites for each second you don't take damage, up to 50%. Not sure exactly what they mean from any of these sources. Probably it means elites. Every time you spend 100 mana, gain 5% damage reduction for 3 seconds. Optionally, it's good. Optionally, you might take those points, put them elsewhere. Protection using the skill with cooldown grants 10% of your maximum life as a barrier for 5 seconds. And with this build, this is amazing because I've taken both Teleport and Frost Nova, 2 skills with cooldown. Another skill with cooldown is probably the ultimate, unless it counts as an ultimate with cooldown, and then they put it in a different category. But we do have 2 skills with cooldown. And even if you take Ice Blades and remove Teleport or Frost Nova, it's still gonna be 2 skills with cooldown. So it's nice. It is definitely nice to have 2 ways to get this. That's why I maxed it out. Elemental attunement, elementally critically striking reduces the cooldown of your defensive skills by 3%. This cannot occur more than once every 10 seconds. So once every 10 seconds, you get cooldown reduction for those skills, the defensive skills. But the thing here is, yeah, once every 10 seconds, getting, even if it's 9% for 3 points, it's not gonna be that great. I decided not to put points into it. Glass Cannon is nice if you think you can handle taking more damage. Again, you might take these 3 points, put them here. Teleport for mobility is lovely. I love playing with teleport or blink or whatever it's called in different games. And there was no way I wouldn't include it in this build, considering that Ice Blade is not that crucial for the setup. Sure, we need vulnerability. We need to make enemies vulnerable. To make them vulnerable and frozen to take that extra damage when both. But we have other ways to do that. And yeah, you take less damage for 5 seconds after using teleport. And here, teleport's cooldown is decreased by 0.5 seconds per enemy hit up to 3 seconds. So if you hit 6 enemies, boom, this cooldown becomes 7.8 from 10.8. And lets you cast this one more often. Frost Nova. Unleash a torrent of frost, freezing enemies around you for 2 seconds. This is instantly freezing, so you're straight up going for the synergy for Shatter there with Frost Nova. And the radius increased by 25%, even better. And then the freeze duration is increased by 20% when hitting 3 or more enemies. So 20% on 2 seconds. That should be what, 0.4 seconds if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I'd rather take this one than this one, but I've intentionally put the point here. So if you think you have enough mana, put it there. But I'd rather be able to have plenty of mana for the build than be starved from mana and be hanging there spamming my basic skill a little bit too often. So you have to make a choice. If you have enough mana, definitely remove this. Then you don't need it if you have plenty of mana. Otherwise, do that, because if you have 0 mana, boom, Frost Nova, hit 5, 6, 10 enemies, boom, then you have enough mana to maybe cast another Ice Shards. Which brings us to Ice Shards. 5 shards are launched, each deals X damage, and deal 25 multiplicative increased damage to frozen enemies. Another good synergy again with Shatter, because you want to do more damage to frozen enemies. Ice shards have percent chance to ricochet to another enemy. And then, while you have a barrier active, Ice shards treats enemies as if they were frozen. But that doesn't work for Shatter. They have to really be frozen if you want the Shatter bonuses to apply. You still need to freeze them. But this is good. Another thing you can do is hitting an enemy with 5 ice shards in a single cast makes them vulnerable. This is very good for bosses. Either of those is good. I prefer this one. But if you think you're applying frozen plenty, or that you don't have barrier enough, then put the point here. Frostbolt. Actually, let's talk about this. Non-physical damage and resistances are increased by 2%. You do non-physical damage with everything, and you need those resistances. 3 points, perfectly nice. Devastation is super nice. You deal extra damage to enemies that have 80% or more HP. But this is more useful to things like Meteor, where you have one massive chunk of damage happening. This build doesn't have a massive chunk of damage happening. The damage happens over time, so I don't think this is that great. But if you have the spare points, if you sacrifice them, remove them from elsewhere, consider putting those here. Another thing, Frostbolt deals damage chills for 13%, 10% chance to explode on shield targets hitting nearby enemies, chance increased by 100% against frozen targets, meaning that 10% chance becomes 20%. That's what they mean by this. It doesn't say increased 200, it says increased by 100. Okay, and now we took this one to generate more mana when hitting chilled or frozen enemies. If you think you're chilling and freezing enough, this one's good to make them vulnerable. To make the frozen enemies vulnerable, but I think you will need this to generate more mana when healing chilled or frozen. So you can just spend less time doing frostbolts, more time doing the rest of the build. Legendary aspects, legendary powers. I'm gonna try quickly explain what they are before I tell you what I've picked for this setup, but you can see it on the screen. Now, each time you hit you kill a monster or you loot a chest or anything other lootable, there is a chance to get an item, and that item has a chance to be legendary. And if it's a legendary item, it will have on it something called a legendary aspect, a legendary power. This is a special legendary only affix, which you can take from one item, put it on another. You can take from an aspect from one legendary, put it on another legendary, or you can take a legendary aspect from one legendary, put it on a yellow item, and make it a legendary that has the stats of this yellow item. Now, there is a catch. It only works if it's from the same category: defensive, offensive, mobility, utility, resource. As you can see, I've listed here the categories, and I've also listed each SWOT category and what can go on it. What category goes on each SWOT. So hopefully this is clear. You can take something from a helmet, put it on a ring. Take it from a ring, put it on an amulet. Take it from an amulet goes in every category, so you can put it in the category it is in. For example, if it's a utility, from an amulet it goes to helmet, gloves, boots, chests, and so on. Now, this is the best in SWOT I've shortlisted, but before we talk about that, there is a second way to get aspects, and it's from dungeons. So let's say you are getting unlucky, you really want this piercing code aspect, but you're getting unlucky and you can get it from drops. You go to Fracture Peaks, you find the dungeon called Dead Man's Dredge. You finish that dungeon, and then after you defeat the final boss and finish it, there will be a user interface called Codex of Power where this legendary aspect will appear, and you can take it from that aspect, take it to the NPC that lets you transfer aspects from one item to another, and then instead of using an item as the source, you use the Codex and pick that aspect from the Codex. But here is the catch. Aspects that you unlocked this way from the Codex, that you use from the Codex, will have the minimum row. Not the minimum row of the stats, the minimum row of this specific affix. Any other stat will still have the strong row. So this one, 20. This will you get always. You will always get 20% less damage per subsequent enemy hit with that piercing. But if you get it as a drop, this could be 21, 23, and so on up until whatever the limit is. So there is the catch, but it's better than nothing. It's better to have that to fill the build and then try to farm the stronger version of it, even the ascended version eventually, which is kind of like Ancients. Now that this is clear, this is the best in SWOT. Umbro for the helmet, based on my opinion. Obviously, that's flexible. Aspect of Might, chest. Biting Coat, gloves. Snow guard on pants. Shared Misery for the boots. I didn't take mobility aspect because you have teleport, so I'd rather be wise about this. Control on the amulet. Amulet has 50% effectiveness. You'll see later why I put control there. Retribution, ring 1. Pummeling, a one-handed weapon. Those go very well together. Prodigy, ring 2. And offhand, piercing coat. If you do go two-handed, you have to sacrifice your offhand aspect. Pummeling will go in the two-handed, which would give it 100% effectiveness. You can maybe put Retribution there if you want, but I think Pummeling is nice because we'll have plenty of frozen stuff. Even if the enemy is not stunned, they will be frozen more often. And that's why Pummeling over Retribution, when normally I put Retribution on the two-handed as suggested. But I still would suggest playing one hand off hand to get that piercing coat. Otherwise, you have to rework stuff. You have to move things around. You have to sacrifice something else from the build. For example, moving Shared Misery here and sacrificing Might or Snow Guard and putting whichever you keep in there. And then actually, you won't even move the Shared Misery. You have to move the Shared Misery here. Then move Umbro or Prodigy elsewhere, and it's doable. Like Piercing Coat could go somewhere. It could go instead of Prodigy. Then the Prodigy replaces something else, and so on. There's ways to do it, but you have to sacrifice one thing and then move things around. But Shared Misery actually has to be here. So you have to probably sacrifice something else, like one of those. Even if you do sacrifice one of those here, there isn't much you can do about it. So now let's go through them. Umbro and Prodigy. I'll start with Prodigy, move to Umbro, and then Shared Misery. Prodigy, casting ultimates, he restores 80 mana. Amazing. Umbro, restore X resource, which is mana in your case, when you crowd control an enemy. Very good, synergizes well with aspect of shared misery. When you hit a crowd controlled enemy, there is chance for that crowd control effect to spread to another unaffected enemy. I wonder if freeze, when you freeze a chilled enemy from stacking enough chill, there would be chance for that freeze to also spread to other enemies that are not frozen. Hopefully it works that way too. Now that we've explained why we took those, let's move on to the defensive ones. Might and Snow Guard. Snow Guard, while within your own blizzard you take less damage, and you would probably want to go there. There's also Snow Veld. Casting Ice Armor makes you unstoppable, but I think this is better than that. I think. Pretty much Unstoppable does this thing. This is what Unstoppable does. Have all control impairing effects removed and prevented. But the other thing is damage reduction, so I'd rather take that. And there's other options as well that you can consider. And then we have Might. Might is one of my favorite non-class specific. Damage reduction additive 25% for 4 seconds when you use your basic skill. Then we have, let's go for Biting Cold first. Biting Cold here, when you freeze an enemy, there is a chance for them to become vulnerable. Then we have Control, which I put in the amulet for 50% effectiveness. You deal X more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. This is additive, and it's great because we have definitely a lot of frozen enemies, and we want to do that extra damage to frozen. So Control stacks with the pummeling damage. And if the enemy is stunned and frozen at the same time, then even Retribution's additive damage will be added. Then we have things like Retribution and Pummeling I already showed you. And then we have Piercing Coat. Piercing Coat, which is Ice Shards pierce 4 times, dealing less damage per subsequent enemy hit. This is not a must-have. That's why I put it on the offhand in case you go two-handed. You might want to sacrifice that one. Or you want to put other stuff. This one is nice. This one is nice. And this one is also nice while you have barriers, if you think you have plenty of them. And there's a lot of choices here that could help with stuff. Hopefully everything's clear. If you have questions, you can ask them in the comments section. To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for Wooter and not so Wooter games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer want to be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end, Struck Web. Keep it cool until next time, and goodbye.